Hello friends and welcome. You're watching the episode number 5 of my Zen and the Art of Guitar maintenance tutorials. Some time ago I showed you how to restring a precision bass, so some of you may ask, why should I watch another Fender bass restringing video? Because the procedure is more or less the same, isn't it? Well, this is an improved edition. After publishing the previous one, I got an email from Damien. Hello there. He was asking about a couple of details he felt were missing in my video. So in this one, we'll address these 2 little secrets I overlooked last time. All right, let's do it. Let's restring my dear brother's Fender jazz bass. So let's begin. Start by loosening off the strings. Same procedure as every time. Be careful not to make any marks to the headstock when you're pulling out those sharp ends of strings from the slotted posts. Normally I would cut off the strings to make it easier to remove them from the bridge. You know, old strings, you're going to throw them away anyways. But in this occasion, these strings that I'm removing, they're almost new, and my brother asked to save them as a spare for him. So I'm doing as we agreed, Jani. So saving the strings. A bit of extra effort here too. Straighten them up enough to get them out from the bridge. Okay, I'm protecting the body, the lacquer. You can pull out the strings. Carefully not to make marks. So at this point I'll clean up the bass a bit. It's a little bit smudgy and dusty, and so I'm using guitar detailer, guitar polish. Clean up the lacquer, clean up the pick guard a bit, cleaning the bridge plate a bit from under those saddles. The fretboard is pretty okay, so it's nice and clean, oiled even. Just go ahead and clean up the headstock a bit. Okay, time to mount in the new strings. So I'll start off by, again, notice I have the protection there, the cloth behind the bridge. So I'm pulling in all the new strings to the bridge first. Here I'm using the string to check that the nut slot, that the string is sliding well over the nut slot and there's not extra friction. So pay attention. Pulling the string straight, I'm holding it there at the E tuner, and that's how much excess string I'm gonna leave. At the end of the headstock, that's where we're gonna cut the excess off. But before we do that, here comes that extra one little thing that hasn't been explained in my previous videos. We're gonna take a couple of centimeters back, like so. And that's what we're gonna do first. Before trimming the string, before cutting it off, we're gonna do a sharp bend right there. And then we're gonna cut it off. And what we are doing here is, it's an old myth, and it comes from vintage round core type strings. Modern strings are mostly hex core wire inside the winding. But old round core strings, the tension between the core wire and the winding may come off if you don't do that sharp bend before cutting it off. So that's the history for that. So you wouldn't need that for this type of modern hex core strings, but it's good to know this. In case you're using vintage style round core strings, it is essential to do that bend before trimming it, because that's when trimming it and you haven't done it, that's when you might end up having problems with the winding coming off and the kind of tension between the core wire and the winding coming off. So to maintain that tension, to maintain the string tension correct, do that bend in case you're using round core strings. So for demonstrational purpose, we did it now even though we're using modern hex core strings. So let's continue. We'll start winding the string around the post like so. And we do it almost all the way, almost all the extra string, but not quite. We'll leave some slack first. And there you go. We are releasing the twist from the string, so there isn't any sideways twist in the string. And now we can tighten it up. And move to the A string, check the nut slot, slides well. You could use lubrication here, but bass strings, they're heavy strings, so not necessary. Okay, let's move on. Again, we're gonna do the same thing, except we're gonna leave a little bit more for the A string, a little bit more. Extra. And this time we're skipping that tight bend that we did for the E string. If you're using round core strings, don't skip it, but if you're using hex core string, it is safe to do it this way. It is really safe to do it without that sharp bend. You're not going to harm your strings in any way by skipping the extra step. Again, almost all the excess string wound around the post. Now we're releasing that twist, there you can see, and the string sits nice and relaxed the whole length of it. And we'll finish off by just seeing that the pack of string around the post is nice and tight. Moving on to the D string. These nut slots slide nicely, so there's no need for any extra steps for them. If you would feel friction there, when you're doing that checking with your strings, if you feel friction that the string doesn't freely slide on in the nut slot, take the bass to a professional who will trim the nut slot for you. So winding the string around the post again. It's gonna tighten up when we finish it off. Okay, and they're releasing the twist. And notice, remember to place the string under the string tree. Always not forget to just leave it over the string tree. And we're moving on to this G string. And here I mean, we have to cut it from there. We cut off that extra wire. But before that, just as a reminder, let's do that bending trick here. That sharp bend before trimming it. And a reminder, if you're using round core strings, it says in the string package, if you have such strings, do that bend before you trim the string. We wouldn't have needed to do it for these Elixir NanoWeb strings that I'm mounting to this bass, but for demonstrational purposes, there it is. And winding the string around the post. Releasing that twist. Placing the string under the string tree, winding it. There you go. We're almost there, a couple of steps. Here you can see what we've done. So with the extra amount of string we got nice angle from the E string, from the A string, forming from the nut to the string post, to the tuner post. And too few rounds, you might end up having resonating sound with open notes that you don't want. So here we're going to do another little extra step that we skipped in my previous videos. Okay, thank you, Damien, for reminding about this. It's not absolutely necessary because this is going to happen on its own anyways when you play the bass an hour or 2 or 3, but to make it quicker for the tuning to set, for the tuning stability to set, we're going to do one little extra step here because the bass strings are thick and they're kind of quite rigid, so the string goes pretty kind of roundly over that saddle. So we're going to press on each string a bit like so. As you can see the difference before and after. The angle is nice and precise now when the string passes the saddle. This would happen on its own for the bass strings after playing a while, but it does make setting the tuning easier. And we can do the same here on the other end too. Like so. And then we are ready to move on to checking the tuning. I'm using here this Sonic Research Turbo Tuner ST200. You will use yours, I will use mine, okay? And we're moving on to the G string. And then we're going to do a little pre-stretch, just doing it here, having the bass on my lap. Do not overstretch the strings because that is detrimental. That's just not good for the strings. And especially if you're having those round core strings, don't do this at all. Skip it. Skip it, skip it, skip it. We're retuning. And almost there. Checking that the notes are ringing fine. So on this video, we're not doing truss rod intonation or other steps of the setup. There will be other videos to cover those topics soon enough, so stay tuned for those. On this video we simply stringed up the bass and that's it. Good to go. Alright, we did it. A quick recap of the key points. Number 1, now as this bass has a fresh set of strings, I will tell regards to my brother that he can prolong the bass string life by keeping his hands clean, by keeping his bass clean. Bass strings last pretty long, and sometimes I come across the question, how do you even know when it's time to change a fresh set? Well, one thing is that the sound of the bass gets darker the older the strings are. This might not be a reason enough to change the strings though, especially if that softer tone is what you're after in the first place. There is one definitive way to know when it is time to change new strings though. Try this. Slide your fingers under the strings, and if you detect heavily worn spots at the fret locations, especially where you play the most, at this point your strings won't play perfectly in tune anymore. And the longer you avoid doing it, the nastier the effect to the intonation of the bass will be. Okay, number 2. On this video we focused on these vintage style precision bass tuners with medium-sized posts. If your bass has smaller diameter tuner posts or the headstock is shaped differently, this may obviously affect to how much extra you should leave when trimming the strings. The bottom line is to pay attention to the string angles from the nut to tuners. Focus especially on the E and A strings in Fender style bass headstocks. Too few rounds equals at having too little angle and your open notes might end up sounding funny, resonating in the nut slots due to lack of pressure. Number 3, hex core versus round core strings. This would be a topic enough for a video of its own, pros and cons of hex and round core, but not going there this time. On this video we simply address the fact that trimming the length of round core strings requires one extra step to make sure the tension between the core wire and the winding around it will be maintained after trimming. This is particularly important for vintage Fender-style slotted post instruments such as this jazz bass, or very commonly seen in precision basses, Telecasters, Stratocasters, and lots of others. So in short, if you're using vintage round core strings and have tuners with slotted posts that require trimming before fitting the strings to the tuners, first bend, then trim. First bend, then trim. While hex core strings today are more or less the norm and they don't require this bend before trimming trick, it is good to know where this myth of bending the string before cutting it to length comes from. So extra special thanks to Damien from Switzerland for asking, and my apologies for not addressing this already in my earlier videos. Okay, releasing the twist of the strings. This little step is something that is often overlooked, but hey, if there is a heavy twist in your bass strings, it can really ruin your bass intonation. So it is worth the effort to adapt this step to your restringing routine. Number 5, pre-stretching the strings. Be very careful to not overstretch. Better not pre-stretch at all than stretch too much, especially if you're using those vintage round core strings again we talked about. Skip this step altogether. Not a good idea to pre-stretch round core strings, as the winding comes off the core wire really easily and destroys the strings completely. Okay, number 6. Don't rush with it. Take your time, breathe in, breathe out. The best result comes from focusing to what you're doing, paying attention to each step I've explained on this video. Alright guys, that's a wrap. Please leave your comments down below, and if you found the video useful, hit that like button. And if you want to miss the next one, do not subscribe, do not hit that bell icon for notifications, okay? Thanks for watching, see you on the next one. Be safe, take care, peace, love and good music.